Okay. I guess as me as being one of the faithful and not claiming to be the theologian, I look at it as the church has councils. They define things. Bulls are issued to the bishops, to the faithful, whatever. We learn what those teachings are by the theologians, the catechisms. That's what actually teaches the faithful, not explicitly the documents of councils and, what like Scripture. We read the Bible, we look at the annotations. When we read John 3:5 and look at the annotation, as a member of the faithful, and if I haven't looked at Trent and I haven't looked at Florence, that's what I have as one of the faithful, and that's how I'm going to learn it as true. I know that this catechism teaches that there is no salvation outside the church. There's no membership into the church by anything but baptism. But then wait a minute, I got this teaching here that says there's such thing as baptism of desire. So there must be some sort of theological concession here as a layperson that maybe I just don't understand. There's some principle that I'm not applying, or there's something I'm missing. And I guess that's where I'm coming from. I just determined maybe there's something I'm missing here. And you know that the church can never contradict itself, so there must be something, 2 plus 2 equals 4. I got 2 plus a half, and the other 1.5, the other half or 1.5 is somewhere in, theological nebulous that I don't know about. And even when one of us reads these documents with all these infallible pronouncements in it, it's written right there, but I guess how it applies, the theologians in the church and the practice of the church, that all comes out, and that's where...
Well, I think I understand your point. That your point is...
what I mean?
Your point is that, your argument is that isn't the voice of the church, isn't the magisterium exercised isn't the proximate rule of faith, the teaching of theologians, etc.? And the answer is no. Okay. If that were true, then the church would have become Arian. Because the majority of the theologians, almost all of them, were teaching Arianism during the Arian crisis. The majority of the theologians during the Great Western Schism were following anti-popes. Okay, and also, and this is a big point, especially with Sedevacantist, by what authority then do you reject the Vatican II Church? If you're supposed to take your understanding of dogmas, etc., from what the, quote, living authorities or theologians at the time are saying, why do you not submit yourself to Vatican II and the common teaching of theologians now, the approved, quote, theologians of Rome, and by what basis do you stand against them?
Right.
That's the point. That's not the proximate rule of faith. The proximate rule of faith is actually the dogmatic definitions. That's why in this section on interpretation in my book, I quote the Council of Trent's decree on the Sacrament of Orders, which says that these canons were given so that all the faithful might know exactly what they believe and can use them as a rule and a measuring stick. Okay? The final authority are the dogmatic definitions, and those actually are the proximate rule of faith, the magisterial teaching.
Right.
And so people who advance that argument, especially Sedevacantists, are blown away on numerous points. They'd have to be Arians in the Arian crisis, and they should follow the Vatican II Church. And that's the point, that there's actually hypocrisy, because you have this heretic, Cicada, who asserts that the common opinion of theologians binds us. Well, first of all, and he tries to quote Pope Pius IX for this. Okay, well, Pope Pius IX says that you're bound by the universal and constant teaching of theologians, which has also been proclaimed by the ordinary teaching power. He doesn't say the common opinion of theologians. So he perverts that, and he constructs a whole false argument based on that. Baptism is not the universal and constant teaching of Catholic theologians. The universal and constant teaching of Catholic theologians is that there is no salvation without water baptism. That's why the Catechism of the Council of Trent, by the way, which has about 40 pages on baptism, doesn't mention the terms baptism or blood once. Doesn't mention the concept of baptism blood once. It mentions about five different times that people cannot be saved without water baptism.
Right.
It says that this is a law that's been imposed upon all, that no man can be saved, that the sacrament is absolutely necessary, okay? And so that's the universal and constant teaching of theologians.
When you, and I want to ask you a question on this. You say it's the universal and constant teaching of theologians that water baptism is necessary for salvation.
Right.
And you say that it is baptism of desire has not been the common teaching of universal or the universal common teaching of theologians. You know what I mean?
The universal and constant.
Right. Where do you get that from? Because, and you may know more theologians than I have, but it seems to me like every theologian that we could find in their writings possible, it teaches that. Are you including the early fathers of...
Right.
Is there... And you get these sources from the faith of the early fathers, right?
Well, there are other sources.
Is there other sources?
Oh, yeah. There are a lot of other sources.
Right, I guess.
That's just a nice compilation because it includes some of the most pertinent quotes for a Catholic. And in 3 volumes, it's not, there are tons of volumes you could look at. But the point is that and even the theologians who believe in baptism of desire also affirm that no man is saved without water baptism.
Right.
Okay, so that's the point.
Contradiction, even them. Are they faithless liars to themselves too, or are they just in error? How do you reconcile that then?
As I pointed out, that on explicit baptism of desire, people have been in error. They've been simply wrong, and so they promoted it because they thought it was the teaching of the church, when in fact it cannot be reconciled with the dogmatic teaching of the church, and they were simply wrong. But what proves that their position is not the universal teaching and that the absolute necessity of water baptism is that they always affirm, that no man is saved without water baptism. Like even St. Robert Bellarmine, who believed in baptism of desire, he admits in his definition on the church, he says that catechumens are excluded.
Huh.
Yeah, he says that catechumens are excluded from the church. There you go.
So there's no such thing of it, and it just seems to me it's just amazing that if this is an error, now, in your term, you think this is an error because people are faithless, they don't have supernatural faith.
Right.
And it inspires evil and doubt and wickedness.
And it was the key to the whole great apostasy once it was extended. Because basically, like, if the door is shut with water baptism, then indifferentism stops. There's a dead end. Okay, indifferentism can only begin and start to build if the notion that people can be saved without baptism in the Catholic faith is accepted. And then from that, it becomes...
includes religions like Buddhism, Hinduism, Jews, because they don't have baptism, right? Is that what you're meaning by this?
Well, what I'm saying to you is if the idea that people don't need baptism was not advanced as an error under the guise of traditional Catholicism at any point, then basically the whole heresy of religious indifferentism could never have spread, because it would have been so blatantly contrary. There wasn't even a starting point, but basically because people started to believe in the 30s, etc., that people can be united to the church. Then these people of other religions are not all, on the road to hell, and so they can make it. Maybe these religions aren't that bad. And so it gives rise to the heresy of religious indifferentism, no doubt about it. That's just a fact. That's why any Novus Ordo priest, it's one of the most revealing. If you started to ask maybe a more knowledgeable Novus Ordo priest, what about outside the Church of Salvation? He would advance the same arguments that the traditional priests who believe in baptism of desire do. They're the same on that issue. They're the very same. That's why almost all the groups who believe in salvation outside the church on that issue have done really a poor job exposing the heresies of the Vatican II anti-popes. Basically, they focus on the argument that the ordinary magisterium cannot contradict itself. They don't really get into the personal heresies of the anti-popes that much. They only get to cover a few. I mean, it's nothing compared to the stuff, the amount of heresies that are covered in our material. And part of the reason for that is because they don't believe that a lot of these heresies on salvation are heresy, because they believe that people can be saved in other religions too. And so they're not much different, actually. That they are in one sense, but in another sense, they're very similar to Anti-Pope Benedict XVI. They both believe that souls can be saved in other religions. But I mean, like, you can't. It's obvious you can't even muster a response to any of the dogmatic arguments I've given you, which provide...
How could you, Brother Peter? You'd have to be a heretic, too. And that's not what I'm trying to be, you know? I want to believe everything the Church teaches, but me looking at things in weight and gravity, and then in how numerous they are. You know what I mean? Yeah, I see that the Church teaches that. Cantate Domino, the Council of Florence, when I first became traditional by your material, when I first became sedevacantist by your material, that just blew me away. I couldn't believe that there was ever such a teaching. Obviously, I didn't know. I was in the Vatican II Church. So when you make this crossover, you are... I've been sedevacantist for a year. I've been what I want to think Catholic right about that time I had my conversion. I'm really touchy on what I'm supposed to believe in that. And